Hi everyone. So today I'm going to be showing you a few basics on how to build your portfolio. And specifically, we're going to be going over a few tips and tricks on how to best use InDesign so that your portfolio is more easy to maintain and manage, as well as how to get your file size to below the 5 or 10 megabytes that a lot of companies are asking for. Um, Especially because if you are submitting digitally now and unable to print your portfolios, file size will be a big issue, and I know a lot of my fellow peers and underclassmen have had issues with that. So we're going to be going over that. Bear in mind, this tutorial will likely suggest that you have to restart your portfolio, but I assure you it is worth it in the long run, and especially if you are a freshman or sophomore building your portfolio for the first time, I encourage you to go through this tutorial. You can deviate from some of the things I tell you, but this is generally more of a less how to design a portfolio and more of a how to best use InDesign to achieve the design that you want. So we're going to get started. So to start your portfolio, we use InDesign. We don't use any word processing apps like Pages or Microsoft Word to build a portfolio. We're going to stick to Adobe's programs. And the three programs we're going to use are Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign. Those are the three that you need. So yeah, let's get started. So to begin, I'm going to create a new document, and then we're going to configure this, and I'm going to go through each of these settings and explain why we chose these settings. So just so that this is cleaner on our file browser, we're going to name portfolio, and we're going to switch to inches. If you are a US student or if you plan on working in America, obviously we use inches. Then again, if you are working internationally, millimeters is probably more your thing. We're going to talk about why or like how to pick a page size for your portfolio. Now, I recommend sticking with the standard US page 8.5 by 11. This makes it easy to print. It also makes it easy to print in tabloid so that you have a folding portfolio if you decide to print it yourself. It's the cheapest printing, like it's the cheapest paper size to print. And also, when you view it on a computer as spreads, 17 by 11 is close enough to like a screen size 16 by 10 ratio. So all in all, I recommend that. You can be artistic or creative and decide to make a square portfolio or a landscape like 17 by 11 page. But I encourage you to stay simple. This will just be efficient and you'll never have to redesign it. Like no one's going to complain by US letter. If you are applying internationally, US letter is fine, but you might want to also consider A4. But just know that A4 is very expensive to print in America, so I don't recommend if you don't have to. Make sure facing pages is checked. This is what makes it a book, like left and right page. Pages, you don't have to worry about that. Start number 1, that's fine. We're going to add columns. This doesn't change anything except for the fact that when you view your document, you have an underlying column grid system. We're going to make it by 12 columns, and then if I turn on preview, you can see what that does to our grid. You can change the column gutter. I usually go for 0.1 inches. I think that gives a good width for each column. Margins, you can change this however you'd like. 0.5 is a pretty good size. A lot of books use 0.5, a lot of magazines in particular. Bleed, make sure to add at least 1/8 of an inch. What a bleed is when you print, you notice how you have those white trim around the page, like that padding. Essentially, no printer in this world can print to the edge of the page. So what printers do is they print on oversized pages and then they trim it. The bleed just makes sure that the content will go beyond the page. If you try to do it exactly at 8.5 by 11, sometimes the printer will not accurately achieve that. So you might notice like a really thin line of white. So what the printers do is they just extend it just ever so slightly so that you don't have to worry about that. Slug, no one uses in today, so you don't have to worry about that. And when you're ready, just press create. And now you have the starting blocks of your portfolio. So we're going to go over a few things. Let's start with paragraph styles. So I'm going to go to my properties tab, and then I'm going to choose a text block. Now, while you're in this editor, just know that you can press W to hide all of the underlying grids or guidelines, so you don't have to worry about that. We're gonna make a little text box. I'm gonna make it 4 columns wide. Or is that 5? No, that's 4. Okay. You don't have to worry about where you're positioning. We're just gonna go over text blocks for now. So in your properties, when you're using the text editor, you'll notice that you have all of these settings, and these are very valuable settings. Because this is how you decide the fonts and the typefaces that you'll use for your typography or your body copy and all of that. So to get started, I am going to add, edit, or type, insert, fill with placeholder text. So we have this copy here. My touch bar is showing a cancel instead of an escape button, so this is going to be a bit challenging, but bear with me. So we have our very first body copy. What we're going to do is now style our body copy. So I select that text, I selected all, Command A, and then I'm going to choose a font or a typeface for my portfolio. So I really like sans serif fonts for architecture portfolios. The reasoning is because in a lot of our portfolio or in architecture, drawings are pretty much either like thin, straight geometric strokes, and sans serifs are the most compatible with such drawings. However, you have the freedom to choose whichever typeface you want to use. Sans serifs are fonts like Times New Roman, or typefaces like Georgia, whereas sans serifs are typefaces like Arial, Helvetica, Futura. There's also a variant called monospace typefaces, which are basically like those code editor typefaces where every character has the same amount of spacing horizontally. So there are a lot of options to use. I traditionally recommend sans serifs because they are the most legible, especially on digital screens. So I'm going to choose a font that I purchased called Zone. I'm going to choose the regular weight. Everything's in German, so it's hard for me to pronounce. And then that's our starting point. Now, this is all Latin characters or words, which is standard for body placeholder text in everywhere, I guess. So now we're going to be going over a few different qualities about typefaces. Before that, quick typography lesson for anyone who's not a graphic design major. A typeface is what we would traditionally think of as like a font, but in reality, our knowledge is wrong. A typeface is literally like the main family of fonts. So Helvetica is a typeface, Graphic is a typeface, Times New Roman is a typeface, yada, yada, yada. A font is a specific variant of a typeface. So this is the regular weight. We're going to go to Craftig, which is the medium weight. This is a font. This is a font. This is a font. But they are all the same typeface. So that's a quick lesson. Now we're going to adjust our copy. There are a few ways you can adjust your fonts. Namely, there's point size, which basically dictates how big the font is on a page. I recommend for body copy traditionally between 9 to 11. That's roughly the size of magazine body copy. So it's small, but it's big enough to be easily read. And traditionally, 12 can feel too large. If you look at an essay, like Times New Roman 12-point double-spaced, that text is huge, especially when you have images and other assets that you want to put in there. So give it a supporting role. Just like let it be there, but not stand out. There's something called leading, which is the spacing between lines. So you'll traditionally know this as line spacing, but the technical term is leading. And you can adjust the spacing, the leading, by clicking these options here. I recommend traditionally 1.45 times the amount of your point size. That makes each line breathe and easy to read. It's a good value that a lot of professional companies will use actually. So that's my recommendation. The larger your point size, the smaller the leading really needs to be. So for like large headlines, traditionally people use 1.1 times the point size for leading. The ultimate goal is maximizing legibility. So do what feels right. There are conventions, but conventions are always meant to be broken, so don't worry if you need to adjust something. Now there's something called tracking, which is the spacing between letters uniformly. So if I increase this to something more dramatic, say 100, notice how all of the letter forms move. And I'm actually going to get out of the text editor and just show you here. These are values that you can easily change. Traditional rule, there's two variants of spacing between letters. One is called tracking, which is, as I said, uniform across all letters, and one is kerning, which is between two individual letters. So conventionally, we use tracking in cases like if the point size is too small and all the letters start to feel mushed together, we expand the tracking so that each letter form has more space to breathe and is easier to read. This is traditionally used in things like footer copy or legalese, where everything is small. With big headlines, sometimes the point size can feel too big. So if I try to simulate this. Oh no. Oh, there we go. Okay. Sorry, the time editor thing is on my touch bar. So we can reduce the spacing between individual letters like this H and E by reducing the kerning. Now this is just in the demo, but basically if you wanted to make it feel uniform, now this H seems a bit too tight, so I will decrease the kerning. So you can go as minute as that, but I mean, for a portfolio, that's not necessary. It's more about graphic design posters and such, so we're not going to worry about that. But make sure your tracking feels appropriate so that your copy is easy to read. Other things, if you want to make something all caps, you can just use this. If you want to make it small caps, just this. Always use these tools that are designed to uniformly change rather than typing something out yourself. A cool effect that some people like to do is do all caps with lots of spacing between letter forms, which is great for headlines or like small headlines, but not a good choice for body copy. So we have that. You can also extend into paragraph settings. You can choose to hyphenate words or not. You can increase the spacing between paragraphs. So I have two paragraphs here. I can actually increase like spacing between paragraphs. I can indent first line. There's a lot of options here that you can explore, which I highly recommend you use so that you uniformly set those rules. You can also add bullets. All of that is here. Now, when you have your desired rules for typography, oh, and before we get there, you can actually change the color as well, which we'll dive into later. Actually, I want this to be just a slight less than 0.125. No. There we go. So that's how I like my body copy. So now, when you want to save these settings, what we can do, I'm going to actually make this something very different. Let's make this Times New Roman so that you can see what happens. We have this. Now we want to save this as our body copy. So what we're going to do is we have a bunch of paragraph styles here. Well, we have one. What we're going to do is say, redefine the style of this basic paragraph to what I have here. And that's done. So now what I can do is, if I have something here, I can just say, I want this to be the basic paragraph, and it will update as so. When you update the basic paragraph property, you'll notice any new text box that I have will be in this basic paragraph style. So this is very convenient because a lot of times you'll just start with Minion Pro 12 point, and that's just, it's annoying if you have to constantly change the properties. And another convenient thing is, say you want to change something down the line. Oh, the body copy is too small. I want to make it uniformly 10 point with 14 leading. If you redefine the style, it updates all of those copies accordingly. So that's a great way to uniformly establish body copy. You can also establish new properties. This is my new heading style. Say you want something for a custom title 18 point, roughly 24 tracking. I think we can reduce the tracking here. Did I say tracking for leading? Sorry. Line spacing is leading, text spacing is tracking. So we have that. We can create a new paragraph style, and I'll call this headings. And then anytime we want to change something to a heading, title of my project, we can give it that new appropriate heading style. And then likewise, we can also update. So you want to decrease the tracking and then update that. It will update here accordingly. So that's a brief introduction to how to use type on InDesign. We're going to move on to our next element, which is color. Quick tip while we're still here. Notice these draggers. When copy extends beyond what you provide space for, it'll give you this red. You can click on that and then continue by making a new text box, and it will actually overflow. So say I wanted to delete this, and then notice the first word here is Loro. If I delete all of this, Loro will come back here. And if I continue typing, well, I have to continue typing quite a bit, you'll notice it continues to overflow to that new box. You can resize a text box to just what it needs to be by double-clicking on any of these properties and then just condensing it so that it's at its appropriate size. So that's copy. Now on to colors. I made a circle, but there's no fill or no stroke, so you don't see anything. I'm going to make this black. In architecture, the color scheme, I mean, not just for fashion, but in general, is predominantly grayscale, white or black. A lot of us like to use accent colors to sort of incorporate some sort of like accent, or I guess something, to make it more uniquely yours. And that's totally okay. Traditionally, we don't overdo the color, just because we want to make sure the architectural work can speak for itself without any presentational aid. And you want to communicate with the least possible enhancements as you can. Everything should be clear. And that's part of like graphic communication. Less is more is sort of, I guess, the phrase we would use for that. People have different philosophies around that, but in terms of portfolio, you can never go wrong with less in terms of color scheme. So we have black, we have white. I'm going to give this a white fill. All of your colors are maintained in swatches. So you'll notice I can give this any of these existing fills. You can add a new fill by clicking on the new swatch, double-clicking on the copy, and then selecting any of the values that you want. With printed materials, we use CMYK. And even if you present your portfolio primarily digitally, make it CMYK so that when you print it, it's exactly how you want it to show. Traditionally, there's no way to tell what a printed page will look like unless you print it yourself. It's sort of like how Eric will print a number of different line weights on a small piece of plot to see what it looks like when you print it. The same goes with color. You can never accurately see it on the screen. So what a lot of designers will do is print a bunch of different swatches to test that out, or they'll buy, those really expensive Pantone color swatch books. Speaking of that, you can try to guess what it'll look like because Pantone provides all of their swatches on these InDesign programs that you can incorporate. So you can preview it and then just add it, and then you have that swatch. Now the way swatches work is they're similar to body copy. So I have these two that use this one swatch. If I change the swatch, say I wanted to use something like this orange instead, then it will uniformly change across. So swatches are another way of uniformly providing color context to your graphic design elements. You don't need all of this. I actually tend to delete mine. But yeah, I mean, make a few swatches. I traditionally have a gray in there as well. And I'll just make that gray by halving my black value. So now I can give this a separate swatch. And when I edit this, it won't affect this because they are on different swatch tones. You can also bypass using swatches and just give it a color of its own, and it will not adhere to any of these rules. And again, swatches are a way to uniformly give color. Most of the time, you want your architectural drawings to be black and white, and then adding one accent color to highlight information or to etc., etc. Like, it's just, the tools are there for you to use as you need them. And I recommend using them when you have something that needs to be uniformly applied. That's a brief introduction on color. We're going to go into something called master pages. Now, when you're designing a book, you traditionally have more than one page, right? So let's say you have 10 pages for this portfolio. Each of these pages, you'll notice, have the letter A. A master is basically similar to a header and footer in a word processing document. It's basically elements that will be on every page. So I'm on my A master now as I selected this page. And what I can do is I can add a text box that says this is a master element. And on a master element, now because this is a spread, it will only show on the right side. And now you'll see on every page, on every spread, I have this is a master element on the right page. Now, what would this be useful for? Very simply put, page numbers. So we're gonna add a little header here. And I'm going to go beyond my margins actually for these non-essential elements. And also I'm going to reduce, I'm going to actually reduce my point size for my header and footer to be slightly smaller than my body copy. So I'm going to, what I like to do is I write my name. I have that. And then we'll put around column 4, I'll put and then if you have trouble aligning, you can always just do this, and smart guides will appear so that you can align things properly. I'm going to add something called a section marker. So type, insert special character, markers, section marker. It'll just say that. Don't worry about that for now. And then I'm going to you can hold Alt and drag to make a duplicate of an object. So that's just a helpful tip. And then from here, delete that section marker, and I'm going to add type, insert special character, markers, current page number. And I'm going to align this to the right so that it is with this proper margin. Make sure to use those grid lines to align things accurately. There we go. So we have, oh, I keep saving when I don't need to. So I have that. And now when I go to all of my other pages, you'll notice that I have these page markers. Now, there isn't a section marker, and that's because I haven't established a section yet. What I can do is click on any of the pages where I want to begin a new section, numbering and section options. You don't need to worry about this unless you have to edit them. Give it a prefix. I usually give my prefixes like a letter before the number. And then the section marker I'll say is like project 1. You can name it what your project actually is because it'll just replace what that section is on the header. You can include the prefix, so if you want it to be A1, I recommend not. This you don't have to worry unless you're actually making a book. So now you have project 1 as your title on all these pages. You can start a new section just by going to numbering section options, say B, project 2, and now you have different header and footer settings. So that's convenient. I'm going to copy this and I'm going to paste it to my left page. And there you go. So I have my master. What I recommend is actually put all of these master elements to a new layer, and you can do that by selecting all of those elements and dragging the selector thing to the next layer. So now I have it on that red outline, which means it's on layer 2. What this does is any element that you put behind it, so like most of us will just use one layer. Any element that I put on layer 1, the header and footer stuff will be on top. And then you can make a new layer if you wanted to go over, like put it on layer 3. And then you can rename these so header and footer so that you can decide where things take priority. You can create additional master templates. So now I have a B master and say I want to make a dark page layout using the bleed as our edge. Now I have this gray page. I can apply a new master by dragging the master page over to the page that I want, and then it will subsequently replace the content. Now make sure to copy any uniform elements onto all of your masters, and you can also change the type color as appropriate. So now this is exactly what you need. So those are your master elements. So we discussed type, we discussed color, and we discussed masters and sections. That's essentially all you need to get started with your portfolio in terms of getting started. You can add body copy as so, and then I'm going to add the fill placeholder text so that you can get a better sense. So we started the graphic design portion. Now we're going to move on to the architectural portion. And to do that, I'm just going to save this. So we're going to now explore how we add our architectural drawings and photographs. And this is the part where reducing file size comes into play. Now, traditionally, what a lot of us like to do, I'm going to find a open screen. There we go. What a lot of us like to do is take our file and just plop it in and resize it and say, done. This is exactly how I want it to be sized. I can adjust the sizing like this and everything is swell. That's great and all. Only thing is you're putting in an image, which if I put it into Photoshop, is 67 inches long and 29 inches tall. If you're having issues with file size, this is the primary reason. And the quickest way to reduce file size is to first start by adjusting all of your image assets, not your drawings, but like all of these renderings or model photos that you have, and making sure that they are sized appropriately. So first things first, I'm going to resize. Now there are a couple of ways you can do this. You can change the image size so that it is sized, constrained proportions, of course, exactly how you need it to be. So 17 inches. And notice how much smaller it gets because this is at 16% zoom. And when you save this, this is now at an optimal resolution for your portfolio. When you're adjusting image size, you want to make sure that your resolution is at 300. That is what it is when you print it. So I'm going to undo what I just did. I'm going to make sure image size is 300 pixels per inch. When you're editing in inches, these values don't change. But now you'll notice that it is getting far bigger. We're waiting for this to load. It can take a while to load because you probably should have gone the other way, but that's fine because you need to do this anyway. So while that's waiting, I'm going to briefly talk about why this is important. When you try to export from InDesign and you don't adjust your image sizes, yes, there are compression settings on the export, but it does not change the actual size of the image. It only changes the resolution, which technically would seem like it works, but the actual dimensions of the image don't change, and so a lot of the file size actually comes from that. So now that we have it at 300, we're going to change it to 17 by whatever this auto constrains to. Or if you want to focus on making it 11 inches tall, then you would change this value and then you would trim the excess from here. So it's a lot smaller. If you want it exactly 17 by 11, you can create a new document, which is 17 by 11 at 300. Make sure CMYK for digital printing purposes. Copy what you just resized, and now it's appropriately sized here. If you want to center this, you can either make the underlying image bigger, or you can, if it's something as simple as this, you can actually, using the select tool, drag the area of the image that is not great, and then shift delete, and use content aware fill, which will auto populate that area of the image. Depending on your computer, this can take very little time, or it can take roughly 20 seconds. If you have access to the Adams Computer Lab, it's also very convenient to just do it all there. So you'll notice it tried to populate most of it. Another quick fix, take a really large brush, press B for the brush tool, use Alt or Option to get the color value, and just start painting over. And there you have it. I centered this rendering, and now it's ready to be imported. So you save this image as whatever you want. So you save that, and then you would drag it in as you would a traditional image asset. So what is the difference between what I showed you and what a lot of people do is, before we drag an image into InDesign, we resize it so that it is constrained to what it would normally take on a portfolio. We don't need something to be bigger than 17 by 11. So reduce it to that at most. But if the image only takes this much space on your portfolio, and we can see how big that is by going to properties. If it's only 5 by 3.65, then make the image 5 by 3. Make a new file 5 by 3.65. Copy that image and position it how you want it to be. And notice how all of this spacing, like the size of this image is unnecessary because it adds so much more definition and data that you don't need when you can just resize it. And when you resave it, Photoshop will export this appropriately so that the file size is a lot less. So I can go to my desktop and then my demo for tutorial. We're going to save as JPEG always for a portfolio. Image 1. This settings here, you don't need it to be large file. You can just set it at 7 or 6 realistically. This stuff also doesn't really matter unless you're designing for web, but I just go for baseline. Okay. And when I go to here, notice how it's already a lot less. Now, granted, you might be wondering, well, if I have like 10 of these, then it'll already be 5 megabytes. That is not true. Don't worry about that. When you compress your PDF online, it will even go further down. So we're ready to add that in, and we have our image asset. So that is how you start with images or renders or photographs. That's how you drastically reduce file size. Drawings will not benefit you as much, but if you can, they are helpful to do so. So we're gonna get out of Photoshop, and now we're gonna work with Illustrator. Now, what I did is I made a document that had all of the guides of my portfolio in it. So you can see how things are by, like if you wanna make this for yourself, like see how big your columns are. And then you can apply that as a rectangle in Illustrator. Well, if I choose a not locked layer. So you can see how I have all of these settings copied over from my portfolio. They're different measurements because I actually changed my margins for my inside so that the inner fold gives a bit more space. I can share this file with you guys if you would like. It will be shared with ARCHtank, as well as a general grid InDesign file that you guys can use for your portfolios. But why is this helpful? Well, we have our drawings. These are my boards, I believe. No, wait, they are not. Are they? I think these are my actual portfolio files, sorry. So exploded axle, let's open that one. Now this is my board. Okay, so if I open my ruler, Command R, This is an artboard that is 36 inches wide by 74-ish inches tall. So this is too big. There's no need for something this big. And so this is where you will start, you copy your drawings from your boards and you start applying them to your portfolio. Make sure you have a layer of your guides separate and then just lock them so that you can never interfere with them. And then you find an appropriate size on this Illustrator document. So I have this. And now you'll notice that the line weights are actually they translated, but they don't scale as even, like they don't scale evenly with the dimensions of the actual drawing. You can change that setting. I believe it is under, I'm gonna have to look for this. In any case, there is a setting for that. I would just Google that if you can't find it. Also, remember, if you checked paste remembers layers, it will copy the layers. That is entirely up to you. You can if you would like. So yeah, it doesn't uniformly change. You will likely have to redraw your drawings, but you can uniformly do the process that I showed you earlier, and then do, make everything light, and then start adding thicknesses to your profile lines. Or if you follow my Illustrator tutorial from before, you'll likely have all of your drawings in the same layer hierarchy, so that when you copy them, you can actually just select each of them. So if you had copied them, if you did your initial board drawings using these same layers and you copied them over, then you'll notice that they populate in these respective layers. And now what's convenient is you can select all of those objects on that layer and uniformly give it a new property. Why is that convenient? Because when you, how do I best explain this? When you take a board drawing like that you made for a studio project and like present it at Crit, and you try to plop it in here, normally the scaling is so difficult because 1-point font looks, 1-point stroke weight looks great on a 36 wide board, but when it scales appropriately for 8.5 by 11, it will be either too thin or too thick. It's just not uniformly applicable. So everything has to be, you're designing for the proper size, and generally that one size does not fit all. One proportion does not fit all. You have to find the appropriate scale. So when you have your drawing all set and configured, you copy the elements of that drawing, make a new document. You don't have to worry about the settings or anything. Just create. Oh, I made a business card template. Okay, well, you don't want to do that. Just choose a standard document. So you have your drawing. It is sized appropriately because you decided how you wanted to scale it on this template, which is the size of your portfolio, right? So I want this drawing to be relatively this size on my portfolio page, is what you specified when you resized it here. So that's convenient because then you have your new drawing in its separate own document. You're going to press Shift-O, which is the artboard tool, and then you're going to go to the properties panel, preset, and then select it to fit to artwork bounds. What this does is it resizes the artboard so that only the content for your drawing is there. You're going to save this. Wow, I have all these different files. Okay, and you're going to say drawing 1. So that's there. What's really convenient about sizing your drawings and images to the exact dimensions you want is when you plop it into InDesign, you don't have to drag to scale it. All you have to do is click, and now this is at the exact scale that you want. Why is this convenient? Because now you can actually make your scale bars appropriate if you need to. You don't have to. If you use a scale bar like this, then it's convenient because it doesn't need like a quarter inch equals something. It's just you have your scale that scales proportionally. And this is, you have your drawings here. And now you can add text. And then add that as necessary. Remember the resize rule. I recommend, while we're here, you don't need 9-point for annotations, and you should probably use a more caption-like font or setting. And then you can supplement your drawings with text in InDesign. So that's how you add drawings and images. And I'm going to show you the structure of my portfolio. So I have my InDesign file, I have my exports, I have any duplicate versions. I have all of my drawings as separate assets. I have all of my images as separate optimized assets. When you export, your first export will be around 20 megabytes. It will feel initially big, but then when you use a PDF compressor online, you will see dramatic losses or compression, maybe up to 70%. And this is literally the most optimized way to do it. You can export. Compression 300 is my recommendation. If it's submitted digitally, you can go down to 144, which is the resolution for Retina displays. A lot of people use Max or high resolution displays now, so traditionally you don't want to go below that. When you want to get this printed, make sure to use document bleed settings and then add crop marks. All of these other things you don't need them. They're not traditionally needed for a portfolio. None of this you have to worry about. But those are the best settings for export. When you're designing a portfolio, your first attempt should be as if you're making a coffee table book or something that is like a presentation of everything you have. Because realistically speaking, you will want a full portfolio when you're going to job interviews. With that said, you should not just have one version of your portfolio, but you should treat this as like the master version. And when you want to send a copy into firms that show select works, or if they have strict requirements for page size or content, then you should duplicate the file, like save as, and then start trimming down and then showing just the highlighted works that you want to show. Ultimately, with a portfolio, the quick test is to open it in a PDF browser and quickly skim through the pages. Simulate how a job interviewer would see your portfolio, which is literally give 30 seconds to see your entire portfolio or less. Each page should feel engaging. There should be some ways for something to stand out so that if something catches their eye, they're like, oh, and then they pause to look at it. Those sorts of variables matter in graphic design for portfolios. So make sure you have some way to call out specific pages. Additionally, what did we talk? We talked about making master portfolio. We talked about making smaller versions of portfolio, making sure everything is engaging. Make sure your portfolio is uniform. And on the note about making a smaller portfolio, if you follow these steps, what you have is a very modular portfolio. So I'm going to open mine. These are the same. I follow the same exact rules. You can add your resume on it. But if you look at the structure of it, every asset is on its own. I locked everything, which is probably not helpful. Let me see if there's a way. Yeah, so taking out the grid lines, you can see how every block is its own thing where I can literally just drag and move anything I want. Some alternatives to building portfolio were things like, oh yeah, just build all of your page in one Photoshop file and plop it in, and it'll be one JPEG that you can reduce the compression of. That's great and all, but when you want to edit your portfolio, it becomes difficult. I can, looking at here, delete pages that I don't want. I can just copy elements from one page to another. I can even, the nice thing about InDesign is you can actually crop assets, so I can just show that much of my drawings from 301, and then I can add some other assets like this over here. And because they're relatively small enough files, I don't have to remake these assets. They're still small enough where I can resize. Like, it's not like I'm adjusting 70-inch documents. These are literally like 4 inches wide. Useful tip, command and then drag. You can resize. Command shift drag, constrain proportions and resize. Otherwise, you're just adjusting the frame. Yeah, so quick keyboard tutorial. Shift is constrain proportions. Command in InDesign is scale all assets of it. So like type size will scale if you scale a text box and all that. Option drag is duplicate, but option, like if you have a selector and an option drag the sizing, it's symmetrical. So keyboard shortcuts are helpful. Notice how I have in this type box, it's my caption. Develop these as you see necessary, right? So start with the title, start with a body copy, add captions and annotations as you need them, and then see it, like whenever you make a new text box, see if it fits into these criteria. Otherwise, you will make a new paragraph style. Swatches, I have a lot, and a lot of these are literally just copied from Illustrator documents, like these gray tones. But these Pantones I selected specifically for my drawings where I wanted to highlight them. And they're predominantly probably in the 301. Yeah, it's these like annotation qualities to them. So the moral of the story is optimize your assets for your portfolio by resizing them and making your portfolio as modular as it can be so that it's easy to edit. And apply global styling. You don't have to edit each individual text box. That wastes so much of your time. Now, you can come to me and say, well, redesigning my portfolio is a lot of time that can be wasteful. Sure, that may be true, and especially if you have a job like time crunch applying for jobs, then do what is most efficient for you. But ultimately, these tips are designed so that any future iteration of a portfolio you have are easy edits. For me to add a project to this portfolio will take maybe 5 minutes. The initial attempt for me to build this portfolio was 2 weeks. And there's no sugarcoating that portfolio building takes time. But what you want to do is the key element, the key like objective of a portfolio is so that it can be easily maintained. And a lot of people restart their portfolio from scratch because of the issues of it being hard to maintain and people forgetting how they built their portfolio in the first place. So I hope these tips were helpful. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. But I hope these tips will help you, and especially if you're building your first portfolio, stick to these practices and you will have a beautiful portfolio in no time. If you need graphic design inspiration for your portfolio, I didn't go over that in this document or in this video. Look at Issue and see what other people are doing. Go on Pinterest and see what graphic design layouts there are. Now, traditionally, you want to stick to Swiss design, just like modern typography with sans serifs and grids and all of that. That makes your life easier, and it guarantees a nice, modern, professional result in no time. And remember, it's your portfolio. The graphic design of your portfolio should not be meant to not compliment. What's the word? Make up for any things that you want to hide in your works in architecture. Your portfolio should let your architectural works shine. And that means giving enough white space, giving enough breathing room, making your drawing stand out and pop. If you need to edit something, and it's the fault of your architecture project, you don't need to edit your portfolio, you need to edit the architectural drawing. And I had to do that countless times. And yeah, so apply these tips. If you want like a an estimated timeline for how to do this. Each drawing can take around 5 minutes to do initially. The very first drawings can take maybe 15 minutes per, but once you have a workflow going, it is very fast. And the earlier you do this, like even in year count, like if you're a sophomore building your portfolio for the first time, the earlier you do this, the more you can achieve in less time. So that is my suggestions to you. Thank you for listening for, I don't know how long it's been, 50 minutes. Yeah, once again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I'm available at edward@edward.kim is my email address. And I'd be more than happy to help you guys out. So yeah, thank you.